Thank you everybody for coming to the webinar about the Soil Health Challenge, which starts on Monday. The first challenge period starts on Monday. What we're going to do in this meeting is we'll introduce ourselves, we'll run through what to expect from the challenge, we'll look at how to select a good monitoring site, we'll discuss some tips and tricks for doing the monitoring methods, and there'll be plenty of time for questions about that. And then we'll talk about what comes next at the very end. But before we get to that, I'll explain that my name's James Diack. I work at Soils for Life. I'm the Farmer Engagement Manager, and this project is something that I've been wanting to do with Soils for Life for at least a couple of years. So it's very exciting for me to see it come to fruition. Just in case people don't know too much about the background of Soils for Life, we've been running for a bit over 10 years, and initially started by former Governor General Michael Jeffrey, who was invited by the Prime Minister of the time to look at national security risks. He was a former military man, and identified that soil security was the primary national security risk for Australia 13, 14 years ago. So one of the things that he did then was start Soils for Life. And we started our work by doing case studies of leading farmers looking after their soil and their soil health. And the organisation has continued to evolve, and we are now doing more peer learning work, which this is an example of. That's farmers learning from farmers. So we have 10 people in our team, and some of the people who've been working on the Soil Health Challenge aren't here today. Our communications manager and our soil scientist, but we do have Courtney. So Courtney, would you be able to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. I'm Courtney. I'm from Rutherglen in Victoria, where I've got a small farm and flour mill, and I've just recently started working with Soils for Life as the project manager for our cropping project. But I'm also helping out with the Soil Health Challenge, kind of on an operations level. So if there's any issues that you're having, yeah, feel free to reach out to me.
David, could you do the honours and introduce yourself? We're so lucky to have you working with us on this project.
No worries. Thanks, James and Courtney. And yeah, g'day, everyone. So David Hardwick's my name. I'm an agroecologist based at Albury-Wodonga in southern New South Wales. Our little business is called Soil, Land, Food, and there's a team of 4 of us, and we do mainly extension and soils and land and regenerative ag sort of projects, land management projects across Australia. Basically, we work right across Australia. And one of our passions is soil health, and especially helping people build their skills in that space. So yeah, we love sort of monitoring soils and looking at soils, and so yeah, we've been really happy to get involved and help the Soils for Life team kind of help pull this together.
Great, thanks, David. Look, a little bit about what to expect from the challenge. Here at Soils for Life, the main goal with this challenge is to support land managers in looking a little bit closer at their soil health and provide some resources and some skills and some framework to look at the soil health, to show how easy it can be to do it on the farm, but also as an organisation, we really want to build a community space where people can discuss soil health and what they're doing for their soil health and learn from each other. So that's the Facebook group is a key part of this process for us. Our aim is to generate discussion in the Facebook group about what people are seeing in their landscape and what they're doing about what they're seeing in the landscape. So that's important for us. We have only so many staff hours and resources that we can put into the project. Just like all land managers, we know only have so much time. So this project is a little bit of an experiment for us. it's quite possible that things might not go 100% right the first time, just like they do when you're changing things on your farm. So please be charitable to us if that happens, but also give us your feedback, because that really helps us get better at what we're doing. So thank you. David, could you talk a little bit about what people can expect to get out of the challenge?
Sure. Yeah. Look, I'll jump a bit further into it and look at soil health monitoring and why we do it and the benefits of it, I guess. Guess first question to ask everyone is, who's done some field monitoring of their soil before, in terms of getting out and having a look at the condition of their soil with a spade or something like that? If you can sort of put into chat or even give us a show of hands. And those of you that don't have a video on, you can press the little reaction button down the bottom, and then you can put up a hand, a thumbs up, if you've been doing any kind of field monitoring of your soil. I can see a few people there. Great. Jeff and Rosie and a few others have put their hand up, and Glenn Chapman's put something there into chat. Yeah, so I guess there's people often will get out and have a poke around with a spade or whatever and have a look what's going on. Then some people do it regularly, so periodic monitoring consistently, and that's obviously the next level. And apart from assessing your soil in the field, out in the paddock, you can obviously look at soil health or monitor soil health with a soil test as well, and that's the other tool in the toolbox, if you like. But this little competition's really about helping everyone learn together, build their confidence, those that are a bit new to it, those of you that are pretty experienced at it, and there seems to be a couple in there. Yeah, just maybe looking at how to improve that or share your experience with others is what it's all about. So there's, yeah, different field techniques for monitoring soil health, and soil biology is a part of that. And so this competition that the guys have set up is really just to help us all learn and improve in that sort of regard. So with that in mind, if you want to chuck into chat, if you can, which specific things you monitor. So do you monitor ground cover, or do you put your undies in the soil, or hide your undies from another family member, steal them and stick them in the soil so they can't find their undies in the drawers, or whatever it is. Like, yeah, just throw into chat what ways you do your monitoring so we can get a feel for what actually people are up to at the moment, I guess. And while you're doing that, I'll probably just, the other thing to sort of highlight is the reason that people monitor their soil health. And I've, in my extension career, working with lots of farmers around the place, I kind of have observed there's three main reasons that you'd want to monitor your soil health in the field. And the first one really is to identify any potential issues with your soil that's holding back productivity. So generally with soils, people chuck a lot of focus onto fertilizers, like add more fertilizer, it'll fix your problems. But a lot of soil issues are actually related to soil function, not the fertility level of the soil, but how those nutrients are cycling and how the plant roots are growing and how the biological systems are functioning. So that's really what we mean by soil health, like how well the soil's functioning, or is it in good condition, not how much nutrients are in it. And so using field diagnosis or field monitoring, you can assess potential soil constraints. So that's things like compaction or pH in the field, or there's just no water getting in there, structural problems, and some of the biological potential constraints as well. So yeah, you can use field monitoring of your soil health to help you diagnose potential limiting factors, which we call soil constraints. And that's really a really important reason to do field assessment, is to actually holistically look at all the aspects of the soil and go, okay, what are my limiting factors? The second reason that people you do monitoring of your soil in the field, the condition of your soil, is to see if you're improving your soil through time. So people might, some of you by the look of it, are regularly, periodically testing, using all bits of gear there, Hariba sensors, bricks, microbiometer. Yep, thanks, Clayton. So yeah, the second reason people monitor their soil health is to sort of see, is my soil improving through time, especially if you're changing your farm practices to like changing your grazing or using different fertilizer types, or just generally or changing your tillage practices, cover crops or plant diversity. So it gives you a bit of encouragement. Oh, yep. Are we on the right track in improving our soil? So that's the second reason people do assess soil health in the field, is to see if there's trends through time. And having worked with lots of graziers and farmers and over more than 20 years doing extension projects, a lot of people really kick themselves a few years after making big changes to their farming practices because they wish they'd done soil monitoring from the beginning, so they could really validate what they're seeing and the changes that they've seen, but they never took some objective measurements early on, which is a bit of a shame that they feel they weren't able to keep an eye on that. There's Rosie. Yeah, you've got heaps in there: earthworm count, dung beetle monitoring. Great. So that's the second reason. So the first one is identifying soil constraints holistically. The second one is to monitor improvement through time objectively in your soil. Like, just because you see an earthworm when you go and dig a paddock, it's not an objective. You'll get hormonal and you'll feel good when you see an earthworm. But if you haven't done it systematically, then it's not objective monitoring. And the third reason that's just sort of emerged in the recent times, which sort of is becoming a really important reason to perhaps monitor your soil health in the field, is for accounting for nature reasons. So there's a lot of emerging opportunities around getting paid for biodiversity or environmental services, or carbon, soil in the carbon, or co-benefits for having a carbon project and then co-benefits for biodiversity, all that kind of stuff. All of that's really emerging, and then I guess in the next 2 or 3 years there'll be some really clear opportunities around getting paid for your natural capital in some way, shape or form. And a lot of those schemes will require you to do objective monitoring, and soils is one aspect of your natural capital that they're already talking about, not just carbon, of course, but sort of part of your biodiversity. So this is another reason to get a bit comfortable with monitoring your soil's condition, soil health, or your soil's biology, or your soil's sort of condition, because it could well be that in the future there'll be market opportunities for you for that as well. So I guess there's 3 reasons that people do monitoring in the field, and I think they're all valid reasons, but it's important to be clear why you're doing it, because that will determine to some extent where you monitor and how you monitor, how vigorous you do it, if that kind of makes sense. So yeah, hopefully that gives you a bit of feel for sort of the reasons why people monitor it. So have a think about for yourself. And the key thing then, I guess, and it was the challenge that James and the team had in setting this competition up, was there's lots of different ways you can measure soils in the field. People have all kind of different techniques and methods. And the reality is that they do take time and a bit of equipment. And so it's about choosing which things to measure and monitor and which things work for me on my place. So James and the team have kind of just come up with a simple set of indicators in the framework in this initial round of the competition. So, it's just an initial thing. There's lots of other things you can measure, but they're kind of really important, simple parameters that we know are kind of fairly universal to all soil types and all land uses. And so they're kind of really effective kind of basic indicators. They do give you a good insight to the condition of your soil or the trending change in condition of your soil if you monitor it through time. And so, yeah, there's obviously there's a few people put in there other ways that they measure tests, including dung beetles is one coming out, earthworm counts, and getting a shovel for a visual estimate there. So there are lots of different ways, and you can buy fancy bits of gear or not so much fancy bits of gear like the microbiometer or even more expensive tools. So there are lots of bits and bobs, but we've just tried to keep it simple and not too time consuming for this round. And we're hoping that it leads to further discussion and everyone kind of investigating more opportunities as we go. James, do you want to add anything to that or throw anything in?
I think the only thing I'd add is that really we know that doing anything on farm, there's a set of competing priorities, and to my mind, the main competition with the challenge is competing against the other things that people need to do, so that they um, have the time to look closer at their soil health and do that in a structured way. So we know that we're competing against the other things that you might need to do, which is why we've tried to keep this as simple as possible. And as David has said, you can go further if you want to once you get started. But this system is designed to be done in a short amount of time, so you can get to finished and be satisfied with what you've achieved, and then it'll build on itself.
Terrific. Thanks, James. Well, I might sort of jump in, and certainly feel free to throw in questions as we go. And Courtney's keeping an eye on the chat list, but I'll keep an eye on it too. But feel free to start throwing in questions or queries, or just experiences you have in your soil monitoring as we go. What we thought we'd do just for the next session, because today's really about setting the scene and getting you guys ready and primed to go out and do all the monitoring. The good news for me is that the last few days, me and Rachel, who works with me, we've been doing our field validation of some of our additional soil health monitoring tool techniques, which we're calling HASH, or holistic assessment of soil health. So we've been out for the last couple of days on all kinds of sites on the property, where we're doing sort of 10 sites across the property to validate the techniques. So I'm kind of ready to jump into it. And I guess the first thing, I might share a screen, the first thing to think about is where you're going to do your monitoring and when. So we'll just sort of touch on that for 5 minutes, and if anyone has any questions, they can throw them in. And then what we'll do is just go through the 5 indicators. I think there's 4 or 5 indicators that you guys will be doing. And it's pretty self-explanatory how to do it. And there's YouTube videos, and then the guide from Soils for Life, and there's other resources, but more just some tips and tricks from my experience, having done it for quite a long time, I don't know, 15 years or so, doing field assessments in fairly systematic ways. So yeah, just some little tips and tricks we've learned to take shortcuts or make things work more effectively. So we can do that and get you guys input as we go. Before we wrap it up and just talk about, open it up for more general questions. So I might just share my screen quickly and see what happens there. Yeah. So hopefully you guys can see that screen with some pickies on it. Someone give me the thumbs up so I know I can see it. Thanks, James. All right. So I've just got a few pickies up from just some different projects over the last few years. But I guess the first thing to talk about is where to sample and when to sample. So I guess there's a couple of things to think about. And the first really important one is why you're doing the monitoring. So are you doing natural capital monitoring over time? Are you trying to identify soil constraints? Or are you just trying to see improvement? And so really, when you're thinking about where to monitor, it's identifying that key monitoring place in your property, in your rural landscape. And so I guess the general 3 things to consider, which is the same for normal soil testing with a lab test, and that is picking a site that is fairly homogeneous. So you can see the first picture there in the top left is a paddock in the Kiewa Valley, northeast Victoria. It's fairly homogeneous in terms of its soil type, its landform, and its land use. And that's really the key thing, that you've got a site that's fairly uniform within about 30 metres, or say 15 to 20 metres from around your GPS point that you make. It's fairly homogeneous in terms of there's no change in soils and there's no change in land use from a treed area to a pasture, etc. So that's the first thing, and the landform's all the same. This is an old sort of foot slope. The second paddock there in the middle at the top is a macadamia orchard in Northern Rivers of New South Wales. And obviously the soil health focused macadamia growers who've been on it for a long time doing monitoring, you've got to kind of make sure you're either monitoring in the canopy zone of the trees or in the interrow. So you kind of would separate those 2 zones out for your different monitoring points if you were to do more than one spot. So yeah, you could choose to do the canopy zone or the interrow, or you might do both if you're really keen. And the third sample there is from a property in the southwest slopes of New South Wales, Bibberinga, where we're actually doing the validation of some of these additional methods, like a tea bag, using a tea bag to measure decomposition, things like that. So what we've done at that property at Bibberinga is look at the really important production land zones or areas of the property that are kind of really critical for the higher production grazing times of year, or if that kind of makes sense. So if you have a dairy, for example, you've got what's called the milking platform, which is your higher value pastures where the dairy herd usually runs. So you might, focus on that area because you're trying to make sure that those soils are really have no soil constraints and they're productive, because that's where you make a lot of your money by selling your milk. So yeah, it's about thinking about the right site. And Brendan Patterson down there on the middle left picture, and the other ones at Harden, they're big properties. You can't do too many monitoring unless you really employ someone full time. So it's about deciding, do I do my really important production area, or do I want to do an interesting site that's a bit different, or a problem area, got a problematic soil sort of management zone, we call it. And so I'll focus in on that area. Or you may want to do a bit of bush or remnant vegetation or forest that's next to a paddock, a farmed or agricultural paddock. So really, it's as long as you keep it consistent in terms of setting up that site, coming back to the same site, and having a clear reason, why I'm choosing this site, then it's really a matter of just making sure that it's fairly homogenous over that monitoring side of that sort of 30 to 50 metre zone around it, I guess, is a key thing. Some other things to think about too is easy access. Do you have relatively easy access to it? And what I worry about when I'm doing the field work with Rachel, who's on the right-hand side at the top there, doing some of the initial field work last year on that particular property, is snakes. So, for example, in summertime, we've got snakes around in this part of the world big time. So, yeah, going out on your own. So it's got to, safety's critical. So if there's really long grass or that kind of thing, or if it's a snaky area on the property that you know is a snaky area, then you just got to be mindful of those kind of things as well. So yeah, so that's about choosing where to sample. I guess apart from that, it's when to do it. And the guidelines in the manual, which I'll just pull up now, I've got it right here, it is. The guidelines in the manual, the little manual that the guys have put together about when to do it, there is somewhere in here. This is the guide anyway. It looks like this, everyone, that hopefully you've all seen. There is a little tips on when to do it. Generally, the best time to do it usually is when you've got field moisture. So if you're in Southern Australia, that's usually sort of autumn, sort of after the autumn break, whenever that is. Probably a month after the autumn break, or spring is ideal in Southern Australia because the soils, usually there's moisture and there's been growth around, the end of winter's usually pretty good. And then you've got a bit of warmth for the biological processes in the soil to be in full swing. So sort of mid to late spring is not too bad. Late September, October.
David,
right now. Yes.
For this project, we have set the monitoring periods to specific fortnights. So
Yes.
we have a fortnight in October, and we have a fortnight in March when we are encouraging people to do the monitoring in those periods, and be supported by the other farmers who are doing the monitoring at the same time. And I guess perhaps the thing people can do about soil moisture there is think about how that might be affecting the results, taking consideration of the conditions at the time.
Yeah, great. Thanks for reminding everyone that, James, and myself as well. Yeah, so for this project, we've got these very specific windows, and that's so that we can all share and learn together. But in the longer term, it is about thinking of an ideal time for you in your farming business. But soil moisture and some growth around are kind of the two things. So in the Northern Australia, in the wet, dry tropics and things, it's usually sort of to the end of the wet season, basically, which corresponds to the autumn down here, early autumn down here. But yeah, so for the project, we've got these two windows for the competition, and it's an ideal. You'll learn by doing. So if it's dry, then you'll learn. It'll help you see sort of how things react in different monitoring. And that's really the key thing, like anything in life. The more you do it, the more you get experienced at it and understand the different aspects of monitoring and how to do it a bit better. So it's all about getting in and having a crack. So yeah, that's sort of when to do it and where to do it. So are there any other thoughts or observations or questions around that, where or when to do it, that we can tackle now before we jump in and have a look at some of the different techniques and just some tips and tricks for those techniques? Just having a look at the chat thing that's there in case I've missed something. Great, thanks, James. Just put in that one. What should we do now? Glenn's put in there where we have had a very dry winter and not spring and rain coming now. Yeah, so Glenn, okay, so you've got really dry conditions. So some of the indicators, the physical indicators like infiltration rate, can be done. The biological indicators, we'll see, it's very problematic to do it during that period. You won't really get meaningful results with the soil invertebrates, if that makes sense. But some of the other indicators, like ground cover and infiltration rate and things, they're more than fine to do in the dry. And you can pre-wet your soil up if it's a drought, and get a watering can, go out a few days before and just water the site, like particularly just the spots where you're going to do, say, an infiltration test. Just water that site with a watering can and then come back, say, 2 or 3 days later. That way, at least you've got moisture in the soil to standardize your infiltration test. I'll talk a little bit about some tips and tricks for each of them in a sec. And Keith, but otherwise, yeah, you some of the indicators you have to skip in a severe drought. Keith, what about the site? Or you don't have to skip them, you can do them, and you might have very low numbers, which again will help you understand trends through seasonal change. So I'm not saying you necessarily have to skip them, you can do them, but you may, particularly soil organisms, you may be a bit disappointed in a drought. What about the site aspect, location? Yeah, all really important, Keith. Site aspect, drainage. And so it's about trying to, just write that down, write some notes on your recording sheet, because you've got a GPS point and it has a gentle slope or steep slope, it's a northern facing, the vegetation type, all of that you can throw in there. There is a recording sheet, which I'll just introduce you to now. The guys have got in there, and they've got a little section in the top there that says site description. So that's where you might put your slope, your aspect, your soil type's already got a section, and seasonal conditions. You might say, very, very no growth, no rain and no growth at the moment, or take a photo, and there's a photo monitoring point suggestion to do as well. Just take a photo point that tells a lot of information in a very easy way. So you've got your, I'm just finishing off these questions. Hang on a minute before we jump on to looking at each of the things. Yeah, so Peter, obviously 150 mil in 9 months, it's a challenging time. So some of the indicators may not be that lively, particularly the soil organisms, but again, it's doing it a few times in different conditions will help you understand, because remember that soil health monitoring, you're often doing it for yourself and it's relative to your own place a lot of the time. So, it's not just about comparing it against some science benchmark somewhere else. You're trying to understand and manage your soil health in your landscape. So it is good to do in different conditions, and just see the different results. Michael's saying there are many different sites, varying fertility, soil composition. Why should I try one above the other? So I guess, Michael, if you're doing it to monitor soil condition in your production areas, so your main activity on the property is primary production, grazing or cropping or whatever it is, and so that those areas that you want to monitor are your production areas, then usually you pick a site that is representative of your most common. If you can only do one site, you pick an area that is representative of your most important production management zone, if that makes sense. So for example, if you have a particular soil type that is a very productive one, you could do that one. Or vice versa. If I have a very problematic soil type where I'm losing yield and I'm not really getting enough out of it agriculturally, you might pick that one because you know it's economically an important site. I'm losing money on this. There's something wrong with it. So you just have to make that decision, and it really does come down to a little bit what your goals, your land use, and your sort of farm business goals are in a way. Unless you're just doing it for natural capital accounting, etc. But even then, you're picking a site that's a large, it's an example of a large soil management zone or land zone on your place, land type on your place, if that makes sense. So yeah, there's no perfect answer for you, Michael. I wish I could give it to you. So it's really reflecting on what you're trying to do. Yeah, exactly. James has put in there, you know, like after you've done it once or twice, you'll see how long it takes, and therefore you can be realistic how many sites you can pick. So in our little project we're doing at the moment, which I think I was showing you these pictures, Bibberinga and up at Harden on Michael Baldry's place, which is that picture in the middle there. Michael's got 10 sites. Bibberinga, we've got 10 sites. And for the last couple of years, 3 to 4 years, we've been doing full, very detailed field assessment, losing a whole range of indicators. And it takes a week, couple of weeks. So it's not, yeah. So just one site to do a few simple things is going to be a couple of hours for you. So you have to be realistic how much you can tackle. Better to do a few things well than too many things poorly. I'm guilty of that all the time. So yeah, just pick on one site and do the monitoring on it really well for a couple of hours a year. People spend more time with their ute being serviced in town, like 2 or 3 times a year getting the ute serviced, and they sit around drinking coffee or doing something downtown, than they do going out doing soil monitoring to keep an eye on their soil other than service the vehicle. And it's only like half a day a year. Give yourself half a day a year. Like you spend more time getting the ute service and your soil asset is worth like 50 times more value to you than the ute. Even a Toyota with lots of bling on it and chrome, it's nowhere near the value of your soil. So just give it half a day a year for monitoring, or a day a year, because it's worth so much more to you than even a Toyota or a Ram truck. Not that I'd buy one of them. I'm not saying anything more about that, but you just don't want to. It's much more than any other asset you've got, no matter how much chrome's on it. So just give yourself half a day, allocate it in your business, basically. Sorry, I'll get off my high horse. Anyway, we better keep going. So it does depend on your goals. So just think those through. And then it also depends on, okay, if I'm agriculture and this is an important soil type in my business, because this is where 70% of my production comes from for the high value milking cows, then okay, let me have a site in this zone, if that makes sense. Or I've got this really problematic area that's been really poorly performing. I've been using fertilizers, it's not working. I'll do that area. Or this is a high value area for biodiversity, so I want to do this one. You have to think what your land use goals are. So, all right. So hopefully that makes sense, everyone. I'm just keeping an eye on time, so I might scoot across now and just start to have a look at a few of the different, just some tips and tricks for the different indicators. So I'll just get up the little manual that everyone hopefully has. So obviously, sorry everyone, there's the photo points that teaches you how to do photo points, which I won't go into now, but it's fairly straightforward. Then there's ground cover, water infiltration, aggregate stability, and soil organisms. So I thought we'd just go through them quickly. I won't sort of show you how to do it because it's all in this manual and in lots of other resources that are out there that I'm sure will be on the Facebook link. But just quickly, with ground cover, obviously the time of year that you do it is, I'm just going to scoot through to it. Hang on a minute, ground cover. So the time of year that you do it is really important, because obviously if you're grazing, that will depend on how much pasture dry biomass you'll have around, or if it's a drought, etc. And if you're in cropping and you've got stubble retention type systems in place, well, the time of year you do your ground cover. So you have to sort of decide, okay, you're deciding when to do your sampling, and it needs to be a critical time of year. So down here where I live in Albury-Wodonga, a really good time of year to do it is autumn as well as spring, because it's easy to keep ground cover at the end of winter. in this part of Australia, unless you're in a really bad drought. It's fairly easy because it's the end of the growing season. So the tricky time of year to keep ground cover is at the end of the summer, when you may not have had much active pasture growth except the last 3 years, which have been a bit different. So yeah, so just be mindful of when you're going to do it. But otherwise, ground cover's fairly consistent. It's fairly easy to do. I'm sure most of you will be familiar with it. And the method that the guys have chosen for this particular simple little challenge is to have a quadrant or a hula hoop, which I think Courtney practices the hula hoop. I've driven past her place and I saw her doing the hula hoop to keep herself fit. So you've got your quadrant and you throw that in your monitoring. So you've got your GPS point and you throw it not too far, like not 50 meters away, people. You just throw it behind 4 or 5 meters. And then one little tip in using the visual assessment method, there are little guide cards. There are kind of like visual estimate cards available through Meat and Livestock Australia. So that's one little tip. So they can kind of help you. Hang on, this stupid thing's come up. But another thing that can do, sorry everyone, I'm just trying to get the annotation button going and they've given me a new highlighter. Okay, now it's telling me what to do. All right, so the one thing you can do, this is in black, is when you're looking down at it, you can divide it into 4. So then you go, for each of the 4, you do an estimate, 10%, 20%, 40% bare, whatever. If you do it in 4 smaller quadrants, it's a little bit easier for the eye to do it a bit more accurately, if that makes sense. It's a little bit like grazing management. The more subdivisions and paddocks you have, the easier it is to eyeball how much pasture's ahead of you. A really big paddock, it's much harder to do that. So if you break it into 4 and then go, all right, that's 30% ground cover, that's 80% ground cover, this one's 60%, and that's 20%, then you can kind of average those 4. So just another way you can do it. But there are estimate cards, reference cards that you can get. Meat and Livestock Australia used to print them, and I'm pretty sure you can print them down online, but maybe we can chase that up for you guys. But yeah, that's using the visual estimate system that we're using for this little challenge. So that's just a way to kind of make it a bit easier to sort of estimate when you're a bit new to it. If that makes sense. Hang on a minute, guys. They've just clear all my drawings. Cool. All right. So I've just got some chats come in there. So thanks, James. Just put in there. And then we've got Rosie, you get confused about estimating the percentage. Yeah, so Rosie, I strongly recommend having a look at some of those visual estimate cards, reference cards, but also hopefully that little break it into 4 does help you, because it's easier to do it on a 4, like a smaller square. So then you just add them up. Yeah. And thanks, Charlotte, very much. Yeah, it is a good point that you've raised. So there's quite a few good ones across Victoria, well, across Australia. So there's been lots of really good soil health monitoring resources, which include ground cover, right across Australia for about 20 years. So I'm showing my soil nerdiness there. There's some really good ones. Some of them are really comprehensive. Some of them are just good little farmer-friendly, quick ones. So yeah, we're not inventing new things here. We're just trying to pull it together in a user-friendly way. I don't think that's a meter quadrant. You can use a 50 centimeter quadrant. Yes, it's 50 centimeters, that one. But it doesn't really matter, Keith, as long as you're consistent with your quadrant year to year, or sort of that's the main thing. And remembering, everyone, that this challenge is about just doing some simple, straightforward things to get your hand into it. If you are to go to a higher level of monitoring, we can talk about that, through the challenge. But yeah, it often means doing more measurements at your monitoring point and things like that. But we can talk all about that later on. But for now, yeah, just get a consistent quadrant. I have a little steel one, and there are other ways to do ground cover. There's an app, and there's satellites in space that you can just ring Elon Musk and he can ring you back after 10 minutes and tell you ground cover. So there's all kinds of things. James, you want to throw something in?
Yeah, the way I think about it is, if I was a raindrop falling out of the sky,
Yeah.
what am I going to land on
Yeah.
when I land on the ground?
Mm.
And the purpose of the quadrat in many ways is to make sure that your eye doesn't, for whatever reason, select in or out some stuff
Yeah.
because you are focused on that type of stuff. It
Yeah.
forces you to consider the whole of the area.
Yeah.
But if you're pretty good at doing that, you might not need the quadrat. If not having the quadrat is going to stop you from going out and doing the monitoring, I'd encourage you to go anyway and do it
Yeah.
and get it done.
Yeah. Great. No, thanks, James. Yeah. So, and as you get more experience at it, you don't usually need the quadrant, or you can do it, eyeball it. And as I say, there are other ways to do it. So the reason ground cover is such an important universal soil health parameter or aspect of the soil's health and function is because physical protection of this topsoil from raindrop energy and from wind and from high temperature is a key driver of a living soil system function. So it influences the physics of the soil and the biology of the soil and the soil's water and air big time. So it has this really important physical thing. So that's why it's a universal parameter. Pretty much for every landscape on the earth, ground cover is a universal soil health, soil function aspect. And so, yeah, recording it and having enough of it is really important. So that's why it's in every single one, even though it's boring and everyone's done it. It's like, yeah, but we want to look at microscopes, Dave. But more important than microscopes is ground cover. Sorry to say that. And it doesn't talk about pasture composition and all this stuff, which are next levels, but just simply protecting the ground is the first thing. So that's ground cover. I'm going to come back to infiltration in a minute, but I'm just going to jump across to the aggregate stability. So aggregate stability is where you get a bit of soil and you don't chuck it, you place it carefully. So you don't just chuck it in, you place it carefully into some distilled water. And what it's measuring actually is when you look at a lump of soil or a clump of soil, hang on a minute, see if I can get one up here. So if we have a look here at Brendan's soil here, this works. Yep, there it is. If you look carefully at Brendan's soil, if we look really carefully there, if I can get my squiggly doodah to work. Oh, they've changed it all. And I don't know about colors. Anyway, we haven't got colors yet. So if you have a look at that, you'll see that this top layer here above the line is slightly different shape, has a different physical appearance to below the line, where it looks like more what we call consolidated or unconsolidated and loose sort of powder. But up here, it's kind of fluffy and it's in these little lumps and stuff, which we call aggregates. So that sort of structure of the soil, the building blocks of it are these small sort of things, which we actually call aggregates. And aggregates look like this. If I can get it up. Yeah. Aggregates obviously look like these little crumbs. So the crumbs or the aggregates in your soil are actually the building blocks of soil structure. So remembering that soil structure is aggregates and pores, the air spaces between the aggregates. That's what soil structure is, aggregates and pores. So the aggregates are kind of like the Besser blocks that build your brick wall of your soil house. And so you can test the strength of each of your bricks in the wall by testing the strength of the aggregates. So the way it's been laid out here in the soil challenge for you is the first thing is to, and I won't go into it, but as you do your test, it's a good idea, and you can see it from the recording sheet here, it's a good idea to do one at the top 0 to 5 centimeters, then at the 5 to 10 centimeters, and then you might even want to do 10 to 15 centimeters. Now, you don't have to do it at different depths. You can just say, I'm just going to grab it from the 0 to 10 depth or whatever depth you like. But it does help you fine tune your understanding of where the structure is changing in the soil. And that structure change is usually driven by plant roots or lack of plant roots. So it does correlate across to the biologically active root zone of your soil. Bulk density does as well. But yeah, so aggregate stability is a good one to do at different depths if you can. So the way you do it is to dig a cube of soil out, like Brendan did there, as you saw, and then we would just take it from that top 0 to 5, and then 5 to 10, and then we could try and get one from there, or we could just say to ourselves, unable, no aggregation, loose and unconsolidated, so it's scoring 0 at that level. So yeah, so that's just some tips around that aggregate stability test or aggregate strength test when you're doing that test, and the equipment and all that's listed in there. But you can see we've just been using little paint palette dishes. You can get cups, or people use ice cube things. Like, everyone has a different kind of thing, but it's always plastic, so you're going to be wrecking the world whatever you do. But yeah, at least if you get well-made stuff, you can reuse it. James?
Yeah, we put 3 depths there in that guide for people who want to, do a full assessment. But if you've only got time for one, that's just fine. Do the one that you think's most important, and be happy.
Great, thank you very much. So yeah, if you only can get one done, it's all good. But yeah, once you get out there, you will be so excited. Like, I was out with Rachel yesterday, but she is a soil nerd as well. So I mean, and I don't know if anyone knows how to do bulk density, but you tap a ring into the ground and then you lift the whole ring out of the ground. It's a very meditative process when you're doing dozens and dozens of them. So we're thinking to make a YouTube video. You know how people make those relaxation YouTube videos of someone brushing their hair or someone like. So we're going to do it with soil health monitoring, with no talking, just the birds in the background and just the gentle sounds of soil health monitoring. So aggregate stability in jars, I mean, it's just take off on the internet. So yeah, if you're going to do one, all good. But I know once you do one, you'll be getting into more. Something happened there. I'm not sure what that was. No worries. Okay, so that's the aggregate stability test. If you're in a very sandy textured soil, then it's sometimes hard, very fine sand, like a sand ridge or something in the grazing country of Queensland, or really sandy soil on sandstone country. It sometimes can be hard to get aggregates, so this test may be difficult. But for most other soil types, you will be able to do aggregate stability. But in very coarse sands, or very even fine sands, but very sandy soil textures, sometimes it can be a bit tricky to do. But give it a go, and yeah, see how you go. All right, so that is the aggregate stability, and there's a visual assessment chart there that you use to sort of score your results, and to give yourself a rating, if that makes sense. So I'll do the soil organisms before I jump into the last one, the infiltration test. So this is also in the guide there. So I'm zooming around. I'll just go down and have a look at these guys. We'll have a quick look at some pictures. So when you're doing the soil organism count, like these guys here are, the tips are to get your cube of soil and carefully kind of take the top. Rainwater. Yeah, thanks for that. Yeah, so use rainwater. The Puro, so you can get the battery water from car repairs or car parts shops. Bunnings also have it. Not that you don't want to just always go there, try to give other companies some business. But if you're going to the supermarket, then buy the stuff in the cardboard box called Puro water. It's a blue cardboard box with a bladder inside it, because that's distilled water. All the other waters in the supermarket, apart from Puro, and there's another one called Aqua Pura, which you sometimes see, I think, in Coles. Both of them are distilled. All the rest of them are spring water. They're trashing the groundwater of Australia, so don't use them. And they've got minerals in them as well, so please don't use them. No, they're not really trashing it. Some of them are quite sustainable, I think. Okay, so coming on to soil organisms, the key thing about soil organisms when you're doing soil organisms, sorry, Judith, I'm just going to put you on mute. Or could you, I've got some background noise, Courtney, from someone. I think it might be Judith down there. Yeah, thank you. Sorry, everyone, I get my hearing, it's a bit ordinary, so I get thrown out. So when you're doing the soil organism test, so you get your 0 to 5 sample of soil, and you can see on that tray, yeah, thanks for that, Clayton. You can see on that tray there, that I've spread the soil out. And the really important thing when you're spreading that top 5 centimeter sample that you've got is to have a big enough tray or table. You can just do it straight on a table. Or what we sometimes use is like a small whiteboard that you buy in the Officeworks, and literally that just becomes the surface. So this tray in front of you in this picture is a little bit small. You can do it in a tray like this. All you do is you split your sample into 2 pieces and do them separately. But what you do is you spread it out. So it's really important that you've got sort of bare ground between the soil. So it's not just a big pile of soil without any bare ground. If you have a look at this picture here, you'll see how the guys have spread it out so there's spaces between the soil clumps. That's really important because it helps you to see things, because soil invertebrates like springtails mites, beetles, polypods, millipedes, all of these guys, they don't like light and heat. They just don't like it. They don't go to the coast for a holiday. They like being underground cover or in the ground. So when you spread it out like that, they will move. They will move towards the clumps. So that's what makes it easier to see them. So that's the first tip. Keep it open a bit, like that. The second tip is when you're starting, break it open and spread it out like that. Then don't move it for a minute or 2. Just leave it and get your eye into scale. If you keep moving it around going, oh, Dave, I can't see anything, and you just keep moving it, you'll never see anything. It takes a little bit of time to get your eye into scale, and just pick on a quarter of that tray. Don't try and cover the whole tray. Just pick on a quarter of it for a minute and then move to another section. And then after a couple of minutes, you can kind of just move the soil a bit in a big broad brush. So move it around a little bit to reorganize it and cause a bit more chaos, if you like. So yeah, so that's just some tips for that. So the third tip that's really important is you need good light. So see how I've asked the guys not to lean right over that tray so that there's good light on it. And that's really important for the human eyes. So we do have another version of this test, which is for lazy people, which is where you get a chook and you just put the chook in front of the tray and you count how many times the chook pecks the tray for 5 minutes. And that is much more effective than humans, because humans, their eyesight's crap when it comes to small things that are under 2 mil. But your chooks mean animals, and animals means you have to get a permit from Soils for Life for the animal welfare and all that. So just do this method, but patience, let your eye get in before you move it, and just make sure to keep it open. And then every now and again, shift it around, if that makes sense. The final thing is you will not see much for sure in a drought or in a dry seasonal time. It will be very hard to see anything. If you're seeing earthworms around, if you're in an area of Australia in your soils, you get earthworms, which is most of Australia, except sort of, the semi-arid areas. If you're seeing earthworms around, then it's most likely you've got other things going on. But if everything's really dormant and hot and dry, it's most likely you may not see much at all. And in this particular little count, we just do the living things, not dead bits and bobs. And so, yeah, there's a little cheat sheet there. Like, I keep it simple. It's just how many different types of things you see. Don't worry if you don't know what the hell it is. But if you know it's completely different than what you saw just a second ago, then that counts as a type. So, yeah. There's any thoughts on that? That's pretty much the just some tips and tools for doing that one. Plenty of light, spread it all out. We're actually just in the process of tweaking this method, because I've been doing it now for about 12 years, I reckon, right across Australia on lots of different soils. And it's a good little thing. It just helps you understand the diversity in your soil. And it's amazing what you do start to see when you get your eye in, if you just give yourself some patience. But yeah, it won't happen in the dry time. So, yeah, so core flute works well. James has put in there core flute. A laundry basket can do the job as well. Core flute will get dirty over time. So after, if you're doing it quite regularly, core flute starts to get pretty crappy and it's hard to clean it. But it is good to use a white background as best you can. You could use butcher's paper, although if the soil's moist, that'll get pretty damp quickly. Or plastic sheets. So yeah, those trays, catering trays are good. they're actually quite hard to find, like a bit bigger than the size I was showing you in the picture. They're really hard to find. In the old days, you could find them a little bit bigger than that, probably twice the size. So I don't know what happened, but people don't use trays anymore. I guess they just eat noodles out of paper cups from the takeaway, so they don't need trays. But yeah, so if there's no more thoughts on that, it's, yeah, get in, have a crack. There's insect guides out there. There's little field guides to insects in Australia. If you're a naturalist or if you're just interested, you might have one already for yourself. They're really handy. They will help you as well. But yeah, just how many different types of things is really the key. So that is the organism diversity count. And the last one that we're doing as part of this, I think it's the last one, hopefully I'm not going to miss something, is the infiltration test. So this is where you get your infiltration ring and where's it gone? There it is. You get your infiltration ring and you stick it in the ground and you pour water in. So obviously the instructions are all in there. Just some tips and tools, tricks when doing it. One of the things we're now doing, which you could add on, is we get a moisture meter from Bunnings. These are the most scientifically accurate science instruments I've ever seen. So you get a moisture meter from Bunnings and you just get your moisture level with that before you do the test, because obviously the moisture content of the soil does influence the test. So if you just want to, keep it a bit more consistent or whatever, then that's a little thing you can add to it. The second thing is, in heavy grass conditions like this, where you've got a lot of pasture biomass, this is, when's this? This is autumn this year, so near Albury, so you can see it was a really good summer. So you can cut it back with scissors or secateurs, back, or shears or whatever, back sort of 5 centimetres off the ground. You want to keep it in field conditions, so you want the pasture there. You don't want to clear the pasture off the ground, but you just cut it back to sort of that 5 centimetres off the ground. And if it's in cropping, the guys have given you an option to put cling wrap, cling film or whatever, into the infiltration ring when you've tapped it in the ground. And then you pour the water in, and just as the water's sort of in up to the level you want to fill it to, like this one, we filled it to about 10 centimetres or 8 centimetres or whatever. I think it was filled to 9 originally. Then you just pull the cling wrap out. And the reason for that is that in bare ground, like a cropping paddock, when you pour a whole lot of water into a concentrated area, you will surface seal. You will seal the surface. So you're kind of like destroying your soil structure, which is what you're trying to test, soil structure, because what this test actually measures is the macro porosity, or the large pores in the soil. And this indicator is one of the most effective indicators to monitor soils, because the macro pores, or the large pores in the soils, are generally one of the first things to change in the soil when it's trashed, and they're one of the first things to come back when your soil is starting to improve. It's what we call a lead indicator. So it will change before your carbon levels change, if that makes sense. So it's often a good indicator to tell you you're on the right track in terms of the soil system is improving its condition and function, is the macro pores come back. And that's what this tests. So it's a really great little indicator. But yeah, just be mindful that in bare ground, you put cling wrap in. Another way you could do it is to put a sponge, like the sponges people use in the kitchen. You can just place that on the soil and then pour it in and then pull the sponge out. You've just protected the surface while you've poured in the water. But in pastures with perennial, with 100% or 80% ground cover and above, you should be fine just pouring it straight in. You can make them out of plastic. You can make them out of steel. You can make them out of bronze. I don't know if bronze would work that well. It's a bit soft maybe. I guess the question I have is, has anyone been using an infiltrometer? And because this is the one bit of gear that you can't necessarily buy, well, you can buy it in the plumbing shop, because you can just get those joiners in the plumbing shop or Bunnings Hardware or whatever, and just use them straight. But has anyone made their own infiltrometer? Has anyone gone out and made one ready for the challenge the next 2 weeks? Yep. Rosie, great. So did you make it out of steel or PVC? Anyone make it out of steel or PVC? PVC.
PVC.
Yeah. PVC. Yeah. if you bevel it with a grinder, so you can use a grinder to cut a bevel in them. So the one edge of it on the bottom of it is kind of beveled in, so it's a little bit sharper without being too sharp. Then it's easier to tap it in the ground. So you can just bevel it with a grinder. I think the guys have got some instructions there with a hand file, to to bevel it, sharpen it at the bottom. But yeah, you can use steel too. So I just get them made up by a local steel fabrication joint in Albury, and I just make up a whole heap of them, get them to do it for me. And steel, they are definitely more robust, that's for sure. I travel on planes a lot, and the PVC ones are definitely much lighter to carry around, but the steel ones are definitely more robust, and they both do a good job. And you can see the guys have got some instructions there. So you will need your infiltrometer ready to go. If you're like me and you do everything at the last minute, then you can always just go straight into the hardware store with plumbing supplies and just grab one of the joiner rings as a last emergency. They have those, just the joiner fittings that are around 150 mil, and you choose one of them. Yep, James.
Yeah, one thing that's helpful to remember is to take a soft piece of softwood, piece of pine, or some kind of timber with you, so that when you are using your lump hammer on the top of the infiltration ring, you are not destroying it if it's made of plastic. So
Yeah.
that's really a good tip. And something that's easy to forget is just a small piece of softwood, bit of pine is usually available, just to stop the hammer breaking the top of the PVC ring.
Yeah, thanks for that. And if you're doing steel, then use a bit of hardwood, because usually the pine cracks. But yeah, if it's steel, then hardwood. If it's PVC, and you bevel it nicely, then yeah, just use a bit of pine, and a little lump hammer or a little mini sledgy will help you. So yeah, that's the infiltration test. Obviously, how to actually do it is all in the outline or on the videos. There's links to some videos how to do it. It does get influenced by the time of year, i.e. the moisture content. And as mentioned before, if you're in a drought and you want to standardize it, you could go out a few days before, just put the watering can on that spot, and then come back with your moisture meter to check it, and then do the test a few days later. If you can do it when the soil's bone dry, you've just got to do it bone dry, periodically, to measure like to the previous year. So that's why we generally sort of say do it when you've got field moisture. But you could also, if you're doing it more than one time of year, if you're really getting into your soil health monitoring, you could do it at the dry time of year and the moisture time of year. So I'm not saying don't monitor then. I'm encouraging you to go out 2 or 3 times a year. It's all good. Okay, I think I've covered everything, James, in terms of the main tricks and some tips for each of those techniques.
We didn't talk very much about photo points, but they're quite easy.
Yes. Yep. So you're just getting. It's good to have a landmark in the distance, and then as a reference. But if you don't have that, then obviously you could use a second post. But yeah, photo points are really good. So have at your monitoring point. I'm just getting that picture up. There you go. There. So your cider post could also be a tree or a fence corner or a rocky outcrop, or something like that, or a building that you can use as your cider reference, landscape reference. And then obviously your photo point post you can put up. When you're setting up to do your soil monitoring and your photo point, you can whack a stake in the ground to do it. But then, especially if you've got grazing going on, not so much if you don't have grazing, then the cattle or the sheep, particularly cattle, will come and kind of like curiously look at that side and disturb it over time. So it's probably a good idea to take that post away after you've done your monitoring. So if you guys are going out doing monitoring, and you put a stake in the ground, you finish all your monitoring, take your photo point, and then you might take the stake away, as long as you've got a good GPS point, GPS location done, and you've got your landscape reference that you're using as your cider post. If you need it, if you can use one. Yeah.
The thing that's great about photo points is that they take hardly any time to actually do. So if you get started and you decide that you can do one or maybe two sites where you do the full 5 methods, but you might have 10 or 15 sites where you could regularly take a photo twice a year, then that is also giving you some extra coverage over your property because it's so fast. Take the photo. You just need to remember to get them off your phone or your camera and put them somewhere where you can refer to them later on.
Yeah. No, thanks, James. Righto, everyone. I think we've kind of got through the tips and tricks of the different methods. The best thing to do is just get out there and have a go. Make sure you've planned, got all your equipment ready, you've got a checklist so you don't get out to the site and go, oh, we forgot this or we forgot that. Well, then you just drive back for 20 minutes to get it. So get yourself organized, give yourself that couple of hours to do it properly. Pick your site where it's going to be relevant and important to your management goals, and get out and have a crack so we can see what everyone did and what results we got. If you can, at the end of it, that'd be good. So I'll finish sharing now and just hand back for any, I guess, final questions, comments, observations from anyone. We'll sort of open it up a bit before we pull up for the day. So I'll just stop sharing that. Thanks, Chris. Chris has sent through that link to the I'm on it for photo points. Any questions?
Does anybody have a
thoughts?
question about that? I mean, one of the key things about this process is farmers learning from farmers. So your questions, you might think maybe it's a bit of a silly question, but somebody else is probably wondering about it as well. And if you put your hand up or you say ask the question, then somebody else will be learning.
I also just wanted to flag that we'll be sharing a digital spreadsheet for the record sheet. So there'll be, it'll be very similar to the record sheet that we've already shared, but in an Excel version. So you can actually attach your photos into the spreadsheet as well.
Keith is just saying, is November okay? Well, Keith, it's ideal if you can do the monitoring during the fortnight because that's a good way to be reminded for it not to slip off the bottom of the to-do list. And you'll get to do it at the same time as everybody else who will be posting their pictures in the Facebook group and the opportunity to discuss them. So it'd be great if you can, follow everybody else and be part of the group when they're doing it. But if you've got some other reason for farm operations, like you're saying, like Trevlin is saying there, then that would be okay. But a key part of this is doing it with everybody else and getting the feedback from everybody else and the discussion about what people are seeing and going to do.
Rosie, did you want to ask your question?
Hey, everyone. My question's around a GPS point. So can I use my iPhone somehow to record a GPS exact point in my paddock?
Yeah, you can use a GPS unit in your phone, Rosie. They're not as accurate as the higher end sort of handheld GPS units, but they're usually not too bad in the new phones, as long as it's not a really scratchy old iPhone that's cracked and comes like it's about 10 years old. But the new ones have fairly good GPS units in them to within a couple of meters. So, they're, and again, if you can also get a landmark, then those two things alone would be fine. But yeah, I think there's some pretty good, easy apps, GPS apps for phones now that you can get. Android, I think Clayton's just put in there, Android's better. Yeah, so I've been out with a GPS unit a few years ago now and a Android unit and the Android, this was seed collecting, and the Android unit was within a couple of meters of the GPS unit. So I don't have an iPhone, but yeah, so Clayton's just let you know, could be 3 or 4 meters out. But again, Rosie, if you've picked a homogeneous monitoring site that's say 30 meters, it's fairly homogeneous within that circumference, then being a couple of meters out each year between years is not, if it's under the same conditions, it's not going to be a problem.
And Trevlin Smith has asked if monitoring a paddock they've just cut for silage is okay.
Yeah, for sure, Trevor. Yeah, that's ideal. Sounds like a production area. Yep, get into it.
I guess the
You're gonna
point
have
is
to,
that
yeah.
you would want to be. Is there something to say about consistency there? Like,
Well, I guess if it's an actively managed paddock, then you'll start to sort of see the condition of it in at the moment under that enterprise, and going forward over a couple of years, if he makes changes or keeps it going as is, you can sort of see how or if it's improving. If it's a bit structurally compacted and things, you can see if you make any changes, can I improve it? And yeah, so yeah, no, it's all good. And just doing it at this time is fine. If you've still got lots of ground cover and you've got the moisture around, I guess is the key.
and Charlotte, I think you can just use maps to get the coordinates or Google Maps.
Yeah,
Thank you.
there are some sort of dedicated GPS apps that are free that you can get from the Google store. I don't use Apple, so I'm not familiar with the ones in Apple, but yeah, there are some really simple maps out there. Clayton's just put in there some tips. Clayton, do you have any preferred GPS app, free app? Because I know there's quite a few SW maps and GPS essentials and things like that, but if anyone's got a bulletproof one, he's just about to shoot something through by the look of it. Thank you. Fields area measurement. Thank you. Terrific. So there's one there, fields area measurement. So maybe Courtney get that one up into the thing. But yeah, it's just you download the app and then you can physically write down your. And I'm assuming, Clayton, you could send that point to your computer and then upload it into a GIS unit, a mapping, or Google Earth if you wanted to anyway. And if you want to spend $200, then the bonus. Yeah, cool, terrific. Thanks, Clayton.
Cool.
Any other thoughts or comments?
With the record sheet, I just wanted to also comment that there's a space at the bottom that if you have been monitoring something in the past, that there is space in the record sheet, and there will be space in the digital record sheet to include those tests as well. So just to re-emphasize that these are kind of like what we've walked through are the 5, the bare minimum. But if you have been historically or want to, look at pH or bulk density or whatever, then there'll be room to record that, and we encourage you to continue recording that.
I guess it's a good opportunity to talk for a little bit about record keeping, because if you go and spend an afternoon twice a year or whatever it is, even if it's a day, you want to be able to look back at the data in a year's time or so on, and you know what works for you in your system. But I certainly find that I don't generally lose my phone, but if I lose my phone, I spend a bit of time finding it. So taking a photo of the printed sheet for making records in the field is a really good way to make sure that even if the piece of paper goes missing, you've still got the information. And then when you go back home, if you have an office or a desk or whatever you use for managing your other records, if you follow that same system, so whether it's you put it in a ring binder, or you have a file on your computer a folder where you file things, then go through that process. It's worth it to keep those records. As Courtney said, we've made up a spreadsheet template, which we'll send out shortly, where you can transfer the information over into a spreadsheet, so that if you're a spreadsheet type of person, I know I am, then you can keep all the information in one place, and you can look at it over time, and that could be really useful. So I just encourage you to follow your normal record keeping procedure to keep this information over time, so that the data is really useful for you.
Thanks, James. And Clayton's just chucked in there too that when you take a photo with your phone, it actually tags the GPS coordinates. So that's another place you'll get your GPS from as well if you're taking your photo. And I'm assuming, Clayton, that in those Androids, that GPS coordinate in that photo tag is actually pretty good within a couple of meters, which will be really all we need.
That's correct, mate. Yes.
Yeah, terrific.
Yeah.
Thanks, Clayton. Yeah, that's good for me. Good to me though as well, because I'm often miss something when I'm out, but I always take a photo. Great, thanks for that. Yeah, just turn your GPS on so Xi Jinping can follow you. Cool. All right. Any other thoughts, questions, comments? Thanks very much for everyone throwing in that stuff and Clayton for those tips, because I know it's a challenge for a lot of us to have a simple, user-friendly way to get GPS coordinates. So, Rosie, I reckon that'll solve our problem. I'm saying our because I have the same problem. Any other thoughts from anyone or questions?
Looks like we're good. Thank you, David.
Yeah, no worries. All right, everyone, we'll get into it. No excuses. The dog chewed my papers, all that. We won't cut the mustard. We want to see real results and a photo of people actually doing it. You can't make up your results. Just say, oh, I'll just fill in anything on the form. You've got to actually do it. So get out there and have a go.
I just remind people that, the really important, certainly a very important part of this project is doing it together as a group and learning from each other. So please post your pictures and comments in the Facebook group as you're doing the monitoring. Other people will see that. They'll be inspired to go and do the monitoring themselves. They'll probably make comments and give you insights into your landscape that you might not otherwise get. Take a photo of your record sheet, post your record sheet in the group. When you're making a post, try and put everything in the one post so we can have a thread there following through about what people are seeing and understanding there, and we're learning from each other. And we will also run another webinar after the end of the fortnight, which starts on Monday. So we've got a 2-week period starting on Monday for everybody to do their monitoring in. And then after that, we'll run a webinar where we can discuss some of the results and what the experience was like and get some more opportunities to discuss and learn together. Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for coming along. Good on you for investing in your knowledge about soil health and for doing it in a way that helps everybody else. Thank you for being part of it.
Thanks, James. Thanks, everyone. Courtney. We look forward to hearing how everyone went.